the boy who could hear every mind. Imagine being born into a world where silence no longer exists, not because people won't stop talking, but because every person around you is talking all at once. Their fears, their hatred, their jealousy, their lies. Now imagine you're only 6 years old. You don't understand why everyone suddenly looks at you with fear. You don't understand why the adults stop smiling. You don't understand why the other children refuse to play with you anymore. All you know is that every smile hides another thought. Every hug hides another intention. Every kind word carries another meaning beneath it. For Shin Asakura, that wasn't a nightmare, it was childhood. Most fans think Shin is simply the funny psychic sidekick in Sakamoto days, the energetic former assassin who can read minds and often serves as the comedic straight man beside the legendary Taro Sakamoto. His telepathy creates hilarious misunderstandings, gives him an edge in combat, and makes him one of the series' most entertaining characters. But beneath the jokes lies one of the most psychologically layered characters in modern shonen manga. Shin isn't simply someone who can read minds. He is someone who has never had the luxury of ignorance. He experiences humanity without its masks. He hears the fear people never voice. He witnesses the selfishness hidden behind kindness. He feels emotions that were never meant to be shared. And perhaps that's why he spends so much of his life searching for one thing that most people take for granted. A place where he doesn't have to fear what everyone is really thinking. Because Shin's greatest battle has never been against elite assassins. It has always been against the voice in his own head asking one relentless question. If my powers disappeared tomorrow, would anyone still choose me? A child who never experienced silence. Most stories treat telepathy as a dream. Imagine knowing when someone likes you. Imagine never being lied to. Imagine always knowing your enemy's next move. It sounds like the perfect superpower, but psychology tells us something very different. The human brain evolved around uncertainty. Every relationship functions because we don't know exactly what other people think. We infer, we guess, we communicate, and we build trust over time. This uncertainty is not a flaw, it's what allows intimacy to exist. If every passing irritation, every selfish impulse, and every fleeting judgment were constantly exposed, relationships would become almost impossible. Shin never had that protective barrier. For him, thoughts are not private. The subconscious leaks into consciousness. Every room becomes an avalanche of mental noise. For a developing child, this is catastrophic. Children learn emotional regulation gradually. They first identify their own feelings, then begin understanding that other people have separate thoughts and emotions. Psychologists call this the development of theory of mind. Shin's theory of mind is violently accelerated. Instead of slowly discovering that people have inner worlds, he is thrown directly into those worlds before he is emotionally equipped to process them. Imagine trying to learn arithmetic while simultaneously being forced into advanced calculus. That is what telepathy does to Shin's emotional development. Instead of learning social cues naturally, his brain is flooded with raw information. Information without context. Information without maturity. Information without protection. Every hateful thought feels personal. Every fearful thought becomes his responsibility. Every contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. Silence, the foundation of psychological rest, simply does not exist. This is the first burden Shin carries. Not loneliness, not violence, noise, endless psychological noise. The laboratory, when childhood becomes an experiment. Shin's early life is not defined by family, it is defined by experimentation. He is raised in an environment where adults don't first see a frightened child, they see a successful research subject. The laboratory becomes his world, reducing identity to usefulness. Instead of unconditional care, he receives attention because of what he can do. Developmental psychology shows that children build self-worth through the responses of caregivers. When love is contingent on performance, children often conclude that they themselves are not enough. Their value depends on what they produce. Shin absorbs this lesson early. His telepathy is no longer just an ability, it becomes his reason for existing. Unlike children who are praised simply for being themselves, Shin grows up under the shadow of utility. Every interaction reinforces the idea that his existence must be justified by his gift. When his powers emerge more fully, the reactions around him change. People become uncomfortable, some become frightened, others distance themselves. To a child, rejection is rarely interpreted as, "They fear my ability." Instead it becomes, "They fear me." This distinction matters, because one attacks the ability, the other attacks the identity. Over time, Shin stops separating the two. He begins believing that if people reject his telepathy, they reject him. Isolation beyond loneliness. Most people understand loneliness as being physically alone. Shin experiences something far stranger. He is emotionally overcrowded yet personally isolated. He constantly hears the thoughts of others, but very few people truly understand him. This creates a unique paradox, surrounded by minds, yet profoundly disconnected. Psychologists describe healthy relationships as having clear interpersonal boundaries. We reveal ourselves gradually, choosing what to share and when to share it. Shin has no such boundaries. He knows what people wish to hide. He hears the insecurity behind confidence, the resentment behind politeness, the fear behind anger. For most people, empathy grows through conversation. For Shin, empathy is forced upon him. He cannot choose when to understand someone. He simply does. And empathy without boundaries becomes exhausting. Modern psychology calls this emotional overload. It happens when someone continually absorbs the emotions of others without adequate recovery. Caregivers, therapists, and emergency workers sometimes experience it after years of emotional labor. Shin experiences a version of it from childhood. His nervous system is constantly activated. He can never fully relax. Even ordinary interactions demand extraordinary mental effort. No wonder he appears impulsive at times. Beneath his cheerful exterior is a brain that has been working overtime for as long as he can remember. Why rejection hurt more than fear? Children naturally blame themselves for circumstances they cannot explain. If parents divorce, many children wonder if they caused it. If friends avoid them, they assume they are unlikable. Shin faces something even more confusing. People's actions and thoughts contradict each other. Someone might smile while secretly fearing him. Another might praise him while internally resenting him. A child lacks the emotional maturity to reconcile these contradictions. So Shin's brain searches for the simplest explanation. There must be something wrong with me. This is the seed of shame. Shame differs from guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. That difference changes lives, because guilt motivates repair, shame motivates hiding. Throughout Sakamoto days, Shin often masks his deeper insecurities with humor, determination, or reckless confidence. These traits make him likable, but they also function as defenses against the lingering fear that he is fundamentally different from everyone else. Meeting Asakura, the first glimpse of acceptance. Every traumatic childhood has moments that determine whether despair becomes permanent. For Shin, that moment arrives when he meets Asakura. For the first time, someone looks beyond the psychic phenomenon. Instead of asking, what can this child do? The relationship begins to answer a more important question. Who is this child? In attachment theory, a secure caregiver provides more than food or shelter. They offer a safe emotional base from which the child can explore the world. Shin has rarely experienced that safety. Asakura changes his emotional landscape. The relationship doesn't erase Shin's trauma, but it introduces a revolutionary possibility. That someone can value him without fear. Children often build their identities by reflecting the people who care for them. Because Asakura believes in Shin, Shin begins believing that perhaps his powers are not only a curse, yet this healing comes with a hidden cost. Shin doesn't merely love Asakura, he begins tying his entire sense of worth to protecting Asakura's dream, the research, the experiments, the belief that his abilities have meaning. This subtle shift plants the seeds for one of Shin's defining psychological traits, sacrificing his own well-being to preserve the hopes of those he loves. Shin Asakura's story does not begin with action, it begins with silence that never existed, with a child forced to hear every fear before he understood his own, with rejection that transformed ability into identity, with a laboratory that measured usefulness instead of humanity, and with the fragile hope offered by one person willing to see a frightened boy rather than an experiment. Before Shin ever became an assassin, before he ever met Sakamoto, before he ever fought legendary killers, his greatest battle had already begun. A battle to answer a question that every lonely child eventually asks. If people could no longer use me, would they still love me? What if the greatest act of love in your life became the foundation of your greatest insecurity? For most children, a parent teaches them who they are. For Shin Asakura, that lesson came much later than it should have. His childhood had already taught him one cruel truth. People only care about what I can do. Then one man entered his life and challenged that belief. Not by taking away Shin's powers, not by promising him a normal life, but by accepting him exactly as he was. At first glance, this seems like the beginning of Shin's healing. Psychologically, however, it is far more complicated. Because when someone saves you after years of neglect, it becomes frighteningly easy to believe that your entire existence must now revolve around repaying them. That is exactly what happens to Shin. His gratitude slowly transforms into obligation. His admiration becomes identity, and without realizing it, he builds his entire self-worth around protecting another person's dream. Why Shin refused to lose his powers. One of Shin's defining decisions is refusing to abandon his telepathy. On the surface, this seems obvious. Why would anyone willingly give up a superpower? But Shin's reasoning isn't based on power, it's based on identity. Most readers interpret his decision as courage. Psychologically, it is much more complicated. Imagine spending your entire childhood believing that your strange ability ruined your life, then finally meeting someone who says, "No, your ability has value. That statement becomes life-changing, not because it changes the power, because it changes the meaning of the power. Humans don't simply seek happiness, we seek meaning. This idea is central to the work of psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who argued that people can endure extraordinary suffering if they believe it serves a purpose. For Shin, telepathy finally has a purpose. It validates Asakura's work. It validates the sacrifices that brought them together. And perhaps most importantly, it validates Shin's own existence. Giving up his powers would mean much more than losing an ability. It would feel like erasing the one thing that made his painful childhood matter. His subconscious asks, if my powers disappear, then what was all that suffering for? That question terrifies him. Trauma creates meaning. Wherever it can, trauma has an interesting psychological effect. People naturally try to create narratives that explain their suffering. If pain has no meaning, it becomes unbearable. This is why survivors often dedicate themselves to causes, careers, or ideals connected to their trauma. Shin does something similar. Instead of rejecting telepathy as the source of his loneliness, he reframes it as proof that Asakura's work was worthwhile. This is psychologically brilliant, but it is also dangerous, because his identity is no longer built on who he is, it is built on what his powers represent. Notice the subtle difference. Healthy identity says, I have telepathy. Shin's identity quietly becomes, I am telepathy. When identity fuses with one characteristic, any threat to that characteristic becomes a threat to the self. Lose the ability, lose yourself. This fusion explains why Shin consistently pushes beyond his limits throughout the series. Failure isn't merely failure. Failure feels like self-erasure. Gratitude that slowly became debt. Gratitude is healthy, indebtedness is not. There is a fine psychological line between the two. Healthy gratitude says, I appreciate what you've done for me. Unhealthy indebtedness says, I owe my entire existence to you. Shin quietly crosses that line, not because Asakura demands it, but because trauma often creates survivors who feel guilty simply for being rescued. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as a form of survivor's guilt. The rescued child begins asking questions like, how do I deserve this? How can I repay them? Am I worth all this effort? Since these questions have no satisfying answers, the child creates one. I'll spend my whole life proving they were right to save me. That becomes Shin's mission, not consciously, subconsciously. Why Shin tries so hard? One of Shin's defining traits is effort. He trains relentlessly. He charges into impossible situations. He accepts terrifying risks. He repeatedly throws himself into danger for others. Many fans interpret this as courage. It certainly is courageous. But courage is only part of the equation. The deeper engine is fear. Fear of becoming unnecessary. Fear of becoming replaceable. Fear that if he cannot contribute, he no longer deserves to stand beside the people he loves. Psychologists describe this as conditional self-worth. Instead of believing, I deserve love because I exist, the person believes, I deserve love because I perform. This mindset often creates high achievers. It also creates chronic anxiety. No accomplishment ever feels enough. Every success simply raises the standard. Every failure becomes catastrophic. This explains Shin's constant drive to improve. He isn't chasing perfection, he's running from inadequacy. Why Sakamoto changes everything. Then Shin meets Taro Sakamoto. At first, Shin idolizes him for the obvious reasons. Legendary assassin, unmatched strength, almost mythical reputation. But Sakamoto represents something far more important psychologically. He destroys Shin's definition of strength. Throughout Shin's childhood, survival meant becoming stronger. Strength meant dominance, efficiency, lethality, control. Then he meets a man who abandoned that life. A man who became a husband, a father, a shopkeeper, and somehow, he's still the strongest person in every room. This completely breaks Shin's worldview, because Sakamoto demonstrates something Shin has never seen before. Real strength isn't measured by how many people you can kill, it's measured by how many people you refuse to lose. That lesson quietly reshapes Shin's psychology. For the first time, power becomes something that protects instead of isolates. Attachment theory and found family. Psychologists divide attachment into several broad styles: secure, anxious, avoidant, disorganized. Shin shows many traits associated with anxious attachment. People with anxious attachment often fear abandonment, overwork to maintain relationships, blame themselves when things go wrong, constantly seek reassurance through actions rather than words. Does this sound familiar? Look at how Shin behaves around Sakamoto. He constantly tries to prove himself. He jumps into danger without hesitation. He volunteers for impossible tasks. He worries about slowing everyone down. He desperately wants to be useful. These aren't random personality quirks. They're adaptive survival strategies developed during childhood. When affection once depended on usefulness, Usefulness becomes your love language. Shin doesn't simply help people. Helping people is how he believes he earns his place in their lives. The fear of being left behind. Every member of the Sakamoto family grows stronger, but Shin experiences their growth differently. When someone else improves, he doesn't just feel inspired, he feels threatened, not because he's jealous, because his subconscious whispers, "You're falling behind. You'll become dead weight." Eventually they'll realize they don't need you. This fear never fully disappears. Instead, it becomes fuel. Fuel for endless training, fuel for reckless bravery, fuel for self-sacrifice. Ironically, the people around Shin never judge him that harshly. The harshest judge has always been Shin himself. His childhood taught him that survival depends on proving his worth every single day. Even after finding a family that accepts him, his nervous system hasn't received the message. Trauma rarely disappears just because circumstances improve. The body remembers old dangers long after they're gone. The invisible contract. By the end of this stage in Shin's life, something profound has happened. He finally has people who genuinely care about him. A father figure who believed in him. A mentor who accepted him. Friends willing to fight beside him. Everything he dreamed of as a lonely child. And yet, the loneliness hasn't completely disappeared. Because trauma isn't only about what happened. It's about the beliefs those experiences leave behind. Shin carries an invisible contract inside his mind. It reads, "Protect everyone. Never become a burden. Always be useful. Never let them regret choosing you." No one else wrote this contract. Shin did, and he lives by it every single day. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe.